Yes.
So, Chris is going to introduce you formally. I'm simply going to say welcome to Perth. I'm sure we will have a chance to welcome you properly at some stage. Before I hand over to Chris, I'm going to turn to the audience and say a couple of things about PEN International, which of course you as the chair of the Writers in Prison Committee know very, very well. I'm just going to stand up for a second. So folks, I think most of you know what PEN International is, but for those who don't, I often say PEN International is a little bit like Amnesty International, but it is specifically for writers and journalists and poets and everybody who lives by what used to be the pen and now is the keyboard. So that's who PEN International is. It has two, I guess it has a broad aim to support the freedoms to read and write and speak within limits of responsible speech. It has underneath that, PEN International believes that borders should be open and people should be connected and writers should be able to speak to each other and connect with each other. So in many countries, many national PEN centers are very focused on linguistic rights and on translations. We try to do both some work in connecting writers from different communities, but a lot of our work is focused on the idea of supporting free speech and the freedom of particular writers to write. So, for example, PEN Perth adopts particular writers and we advocate for them. You will, of course, over the last week, you will have seen that Julian Assange is in focus again. And for a month or so before that, Yang Henjung, the Australian who's being held in China, was in focus in the media. So we have had a bit to do, the PEN Perth has had a bit to do with supporting those advocacy groups in some ways. So if I can, as a general point, say welcome you all to this event from PEN International Perth Centre. And we have got, where is Dan? Here he is. We've got our secretary here who will sign you up as a member at a moment's notice if you're interested. And if you haven't joined already, I know some of you are members. And if you're not members and you don't want to join, you can always follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, and various kinds of social media. Without further ado, because I know you're not here to listen to PEN promotional material, you are here to listen to Thida, surgeon, writer, journalist, former political prisoner, and current chair of PEN International's Central Committee for Writers in Prison. Chris will introduce you more formally, Thida, and I wanted to introduce Chris. Chris Lynn was on the PEN International Perth Committee for many, many years, and I think you were one of the founding members of PEN Perth in its second iteration, were you not? So PEN Perth has had two iterations. It was there years ago and then closed up for various reasons in the late 80s, but when we were re-establishing it, I wasn't a founding member, but Chris was. Chris is also an academic colleague from University of Western Australia and holds a position in the Centre for Public Policy. Thank you, Chris, very much. Chris also comes with all the expertise that we want to have in what is going on in the political context and military context in Burma. Thank you, Chris, for agreeing to chair this session.
Thanks very much, Krishna.
And I'll jump right to it. So just a very warm welcome to you, Thida. You can't see it, but we've got a room of about 20, 25 people who are very keen to hear your thoughts. And I'll start just by introducing Thida very briefly. So Thida, as Krishna mentioned, is a Burmese human rights activist. She's a writer, political commentator, and a surgeon as well in a previous life. So quite the sort of range of different areas of expertise there. But what brings her to our conversation tonight is that for many years she's been a stalwart of the PEN International Committee. She's a recipient of the PEN Barbara Goldsmith Freedom to Write Award. And I suppose one of the reasons sort of behind her PEN journey was her work in human rights advocacy, particularly around advocacy for freedom of expression in the 90s, which actually led her to being imprisoned by the Burmese government at the time. And she was only released in 1999 after serving 6 years in prison. But since her release, she's continued to advocate for the rights of writers and journalists in Myanmar and also globally as well. She's been a fellow of the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa, Brown University, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University, and the Macmillan Center at Yale. She co-founded PEN Myanmar in 2013 and became its first president at a time maybe when the restrictions on press freedom were starting to ease a little bit post-2012. And she served in this role until 2016. In 2016, Thida was honored with the first Distributing the Peace Award by the Václav Havel Library Foundation in New York. She's published over 15 books and collections. And in September 2021, Thida was elected as chair of PEN International's Writers in Prison Committee, leading the organization's efforts for persecuted writers globally. Since the military coup in 2021, she has spent her time continuing her work and undertaking writing residencies, first in the US and currently in Germany, which is where she's zooming in from today. And I want to just acknowledge too that she's joining us at a time that's quite a delicate personal situation and precarious situation for her as well. So Thida, we're really obliged to you and thanks very much for your time. Can we please give her just a round of welcome for tonight?
Thank you so much.
I want to start, I suppose, in many ways by just talking a little bit about your background. So I suppose in many ways, you're the perfect example of the impact of PEN's work and its advocacy for writers. And to my understanding, I think you first came across PEN's work during your term in prison. So can you tell us a little bit about that story, how you came to be involved with the PEN international community and its impact on your career in writing?
Sure. I used to say I owe PEN. So then PEN owns me. So that's the very beginning. From the very beginning, because of the very heavy censorship and there was no civil rights in my country, we haven't known PEN existed, until and unless in 1990, the first time, my senior editor and mentor, Miu Minh Nhing, and the others were arrested, and they have been recognized as the honorary member by some of the PEN centers. This is the very beginning I noticed. And since then, I really, really interested in the work PEN has been doing for several years, and committed to that, the protection of the prosecuted writers. So since then, I have been secretly in touch with PEN. And as soon as I was released, and I noticed both PEN International and Amnesty International had been pretty much hard work on my release. That's making me, that's why I said I'm grateful and I owe PEN a lot. And then after the relaxation of the censorship and after a little bit reforming in terms of the civil rights in my country, it was the Freedom of Association law established in 2012. Then I can start running the PEN Myanmar Center, So I was the very first elected president of PEN Myanmar. And since then, I have been, pretty much working on the development of the PEN Myanmar Center and relationship with the other PEN centers. And then in 2016, I was first elected as the board member as a whole of the PEN International. And then I keep running the candidacy for the PEN International's board member, re-elected in 2019. But in 2021, there was the election for the chair of the Insein Prison committee, and I decided to leave my country 2 months after the coup because of the situation, and the election for the chair of the Insein Prison committee will be in May. So since then, I live abroad. I live away from my country, and yeah, I keep serving as the chair of the Insein Prison committee, happy working together with the other PEN Center and the secretary of the PEN International.
Thanks very much, Thida. And I suppose if I can hone in on, so you spoke about your advocacy work, in Myanmar in the 90s, and as I understand it, you were also a student at the time, during the 88 civil crisis at that point in time as well. So you really, come from a sort of long history of advocacy. You've seen Myanmar go through different twists and turns, I suppose, in its sort of political history. Can you take the audience through, I suppose, for those who aren't really familiar with Myanmar's history, beyond what they might see in the international media, can you explain a little bit about what it was like at that time, and then just take us through a little bit to the present moment?
Sure. Yeah. Before 1988, there was a very heavy censorship since 1962. The very first military coup, and it turned out to be the socialist government. And after 26 years, we did a protest in 1988. And at that time, the whole society is not very well known about what is democracy, what are the basic human rights. So we were pretty much like simply against the socialist government, but after a couple of weeks, we ended up in another military coup. And this time, the military government after 1988 was pretty much harder than ever, the worse than the socialist government. The censorship is going on. So the difficult part is, of course, we were very busy against the military dictatorship, but at the same time, with this so many atrocities and restrictions, there is very few chance for us to educate our own people what is democracy, what is human rights, etc., etc. So that's why a lot of people, they simply don't know about our own civil and political rights. So that's the biggest challenge in these days. So compared to the 1988 demonstrations and the revolution, the current revolution is far better in terms of the role of the citizens in the resistance movement, because since 2010, there was quasi-civilian governments, 2 consecutive quasi-civilian governments give a little bit relaxations in terms of civil and political rights. So people have been accustomed to a couple of the idea and concept of democracy and the basic human rights. So this current revolution is far more advanced and progressive compared to the 1988 one. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Because there is very much between the 88 moment, which was in many ways quite a symbolic watershed moment, which was led sort of countrywide, mass demonstrations against the military government at the time, and then the current cultural moment as well, post-military coup. And I just want to, just for the benefit of our audience, just lay out a few stats there. I suppose that just paints a picture of the situation. Myanmar currently ranks as 173rd out of 180 for press freedom. Did this one come as a surprise to you? There are currently 70 journalists detained, but that's just journalists, and of course these are just known cases. Overall, there are over 19,000 political prisoners detained, reported cases. Since the coup, there have been just over 4,000 who've been killed by the military government, And then, of course, if we're talking about rights with regards to freedom of expression, there have been increased online and offline surveillance, which have severely restricted, the rights of citizens to privacy, to information, freedom of movement, widespread internet and telecommunications shutdowns as well, use of CCTV cameras with facial recognition capabilities, and also a clampdown on international NGOs, non-government organizations, and imposing quite tight restrictions on them and their capacity to be able to help civilians as well. So, Thida, can you give us a sense of, I suppose, how the military has further diminished that space for free expression and free association since the coup? We know these are long-standing issues, but can you give us a sense of how much the situation has worsened since 2021?
Sure. As soon as they made this coup attempt and they introduced the cybersecurity law, and that's undermine all our rights, digital dictatorship has been introduced. So internet shutdown and some other social media based surveillance system has been well established right now. For example, like one editors, I think 4 or 6 months ago, he just simply changed his social media profile into black in order to express his mourning about the air strikes directly hit and killed the kindergarten school students. So he just from that area, he's originally from that part of the country, and he just simply show how much he was sorry about that, and he was arrested for changing his profile into black. There is no other crime he committed, but yeah, he was released after I think 4 or 5 months. But that's the very simple symbol of how much the free speech and free expression has been limited and restricted and being punished by the military dictatorship. And after as you said, some of the number is pretty much modest for the reasons of the very confirmation. For example, like some of the writers and the journalists has been under detention right now, but we cannot disclose because the threat is not just to them, but also their family members. Their family members were arrested for a while and threatened not to disclose this. So we couldn't make any proper evidence because the family member wouldn't let us they recognize it, because as soon as their arrest and their detention has been disclosed by the international community, the family members will be punished, something like that. So this is the situation right now, and there are a couple of other surveillance systems is going on, and the monopolization of the internet access and the investment in the mobile service provider and internet has been mainly by military officers and their family members and the cronies. So there is no way out, and currently there is no existing literature magazine whatsoever. Only one has re-established a couple, I think 3-4 months ago. But even though there is no censorship system has reintroduced, but it is very dangerous. There are a couple of the existing laws waiting for suing them. That's why the whole situation is pretty bad, and a lot of the journalists has already left the country, or they couldn't practice their works inside the country.
Yeah. So I think what you're really saying there is, the net is getting cast tighter and tighter. And we've spoken a little bit about the political situation and the restrictions on free speech, the restrictions on social media, the monitoring, all that sort of stuff, the digital monitoring and censorship. Looking at it from a slightly different angle, and we've hinted at this a little bit already, but the economic hardships that come with that as well, specifically for writers and journalists to be able to earn a living. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because when I spoke to you last year, this was one of the topics that we ended up covering. So just to give our audience a sense of the lived economic reality, which is just a common reality across the board, specifically for writers? What are some of the specific
That's
challenges? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, a couple of writers has been putting under the defamation charges. So some needs to keep going under hiding. For example, like the chairperson of the PEN Myanmar, he passed away in June, under hiding. Since as soon as the coup happened, and he was put under the defamation charges, so he went under hiding, and he couldn't have a proper medical treatment, and then he passed away under hiding. So there are a couple of other writers facing this thing. So they cannot use their pen names, and there is not much platform to publish their pieces. So their earnings is pretty much limited, And a couple of I might say the journals, the weekly or monthly journals is not properly running. So it's a very rare opportunities for them to get published and to get earning. Only one literature magazine is running, even though there are a couple of the publishing houses has been running some I might say novellas, and some poetry book has been published already, but not that much the good distribution system, because of the at least half of the country is under the civil war already. So that distribution system has been pretty much in very difficult situation, and the state's postal services is also pretty much restricted because of the civil war. So it's a very difficult situation for the writers to survive. And with so many atrocities all over, and of course, irregular electricity and irregular internet access, a lot of writers have no guts, no passion, no mood to establish, to write the proper kind of the literature. They need other favorable conditions to voice out or to reflect their feelings, but the situations make them in deep either sorrow or bitterness. So it's very hard for them even to produce or to get published. That the current situation is, I think, the worst ever.
It's a really sad sort of picture that you're painting there. And I suppose that the challenges of the writers as well, not having available platforms to share their work. And in many ways, a piece of writing is only as much as the readership that it's able to circulate as well, right? So I suppose, all those things combined. Look, maybe this is a good point to actually delve into your own writing, and and I suppose, as I understand it, from your time in the US and in Germany now, you've been very industrious. You've just recently finished a book that you're hoping to publish. Can you share with the audience a piece from it? And then I suppose to explain what that piece of writing means to you. Why is that, and why is the book important for this particular moment?
Yes, I recently finished a book. Its potential title is Amaze. So regarding to my current situation, my country situations, a lot of people keep saying that the military dictatorship again, and it's like the U-turn for us. We having on the track of the democracy already, and then now it's back to military dictatorship. So it seems like the U-turn, but for us, my argument is we never ever been able to make any kind of the advancement. So for having the U-turn, we need to move from A to B and back to A. This is U-turn. But I never believe we have reached to B. We already in a maze at the place of A. So that's my argument. And I published a book called The Roadmap. The Roadmap is from 1988 to 2010. So after 2010 to 2021, this decade seems to be the march to the destination has been reached to be something like that, the point B, these decades. But for us, that was a maze. Of course, we have been keep marching, but we march in a maze, not on the road to democracy. Because of the 2008 Constitution, because of the old legacy of the colonialism introduced identity politics, and some other new issues, we have been in a maze. It sounded like we did a lot of effort to reach to the destination, but we cannot go through a maze. That's why my argument is, of course, this is not a U-turn because we never been out of a maze. This 2021 revolution is an attempt to get rid of or tearing down all the walls of this maze to get back on the road to democracy. So this is the book about the situation after the coup. It's all about the Spring Revolution and how the Spring Revolution is not just the physical protest or the hybrid kind of the resistance, peaceful and the armed revolution against the dictatorship, but also the conceptual revolutions against all these odds. The kind of the other concept in a labyrinth. Yeah.
Did you have you mentioned you had a poem there that you'd like to share with us. Would you be happy to read that out as a
Sure,
allow the audience to get a sense of your writing, but also maybe to anchor some of the things that you've been talking about?
Yeah, this is kind of that poem I written before I wrote this book. So yeah, the poem is called Get Out of the Maze. No more at the junction of two roads. No more at the fork in the road. We are already in the maze. We know the path is convoluted, but we are determined to walk, not missing our goal like rodents follow the smell of cheese without having an experience of what peace is. We just follow the scent of blood rather than carve those passages and get out of the loop into the dead end. But the path tends towards the sea of blood, no more at the junction of two roads. We are in the maze. Flowers might be fallen, but spring won't be ruined. We cried out in the roads, respect our votes. But our roads had been stopped. Our vote has been chopped. No more fork in the road. We are trapped in the maze. Fight or fright. Passage to the prison or to the tomb. We can only choose the right not to flight. Someone arrested this evening. The next morning, the family received his dead body. Why can we still choose to be frightened? Many of us who were ambiguous chose the path of armed struggle. No more at the junction of two roads. We are in the maze. An eye for an eye would make the whole world blind. But among intellectual blinds, an eye on the walls of a maze could shoot you to death. And there are many eyes fixed on this puzzled road. There will be no branch without a watching eye. No more fork in the road. We are in the built maze. We still need to reach our goal, though we are forced not to choose the paths anymore. We can still break down those universal walls. Together, we can still make the base into an organized space of certain future with common interests and shared values. We just need to be aware of what this maze is and how we can turn it inside out. Let's get out of this maze together. Thank you.
Thank you, Thida. What struck me just listening to you recite that poem is the circularity of the verse. You know, the symbol of the maze that you're talking about, but the repetition of the lines as well. And I think that really hones down perhaps your sense of frustration too, that it appears we're going from point A to B. And it certainly looked like that way, you know, post-2010, just for our listeners here, that there was a real sense of optimism when we transitioned into something of a, as Thida said, a quasi-civilian government. The country was opening up. There was a real hope that we would make a lasting transition into democratic rule. Only for this to happen, you know, so I really understand, or at least can I sympathize with the frustration there, that we seem to be going in circles and not making much progress. I suppose my question to you is, how do you view the current Spring Revolution, you know, post-2021 coup? You've already mentioned that it's quite different to 1988, that particular cultural moment. What will it take for us to break out of this maze, as you say, and do you see, you know, signs for optimism, or at least signs of encouragement that you can see that this might be, you know, that there might be something lasting that comes out of this?
Well, yeah, it's this 2021 Spring Revolution, it's pretty much more, I might say, ambitious. You know, it's aiming not just to get rid of the military dictatorship, it's aiming to get rid of any sorts of dictatorship. So it's more like decentralized collective leadership. And also at the same time, it's also try to make the whole society pretty much more open to discuss any taboos, you know. So for example, like the role of the gender and the role of the religious people, something pretty much sensitive taboo has been outspokenly discussed, and talking about the future nation building without these all the old identity-based kind of the bad idea, something like that. So it's pretty much like very different, but at the same time, of course, this is the hybrid one, not just the peaceful protest, but also the armed resistance. So it's very new. It sounded like the a little bit violent form of the protest, violent form of the resistance, but the actual problem from the military is they are not just simply violent as they were in the past. This time is they make kind of the terror, you know. That's why it's the national unity government has been recognized, the current military coup leader and the whole military, as the terrorist organizations. They make the terror against its own citizens, because they have been killed and arrested even the kindergarten kids, you know. It's they use more than 200 airstrikes against the citizens. So this is pretty much like very difficult, but pretty much promising. At the same time, you know, the current military, the state military, is really corrupted and failing, you know, even to combat with the newly established People Defense Forces. The duration of the newly established People Defense Forces is less than 2.5 years. But in terms of fighting against them, the state militaries, you know, the more than 70 years old states military, widely recognized as in terms of their resources is really very much advanced, but they are failing. They are literally failing every single battles against the People Defense Forces. And on top of that, the way they recruit it's more like human trafficking style, or their incentive is, impunity. So for that reason, the whole current state's military is pretty much like a terrorist, simply the terrorist organization. And currently, even on the top leaders level, they are trying to stabbing each other's backs in terms of the competing for having the corrupted money, something like that. So the whole military is pretty much useless anymore. That's why the aim of this Spring Revolution is to replace the aim of the People Defense Forces is to replace the state's military into more professionally established federal unit, the federal the security unit, something like that. So the current revolution is more like not just facing the military dictatorship, it's just rebuilding the whole country from so many aspects, I might say. Yeah.
Mathilda, I'm just going to pick apart some of those things that you just mentioned, just for the benefit of our audience, because you mentioned, entities like the National Unity Government, People's Defence Force. So just for, I suppose, people who are a little bit sort of unacquainted with some of the things that have been going on, what's basically happening at the moment is a really entrenched conflict, and in response to the military coup that took place in 2021, the exiled leaders and elected parliamentarians have formed what we call National Unity Government, and declared itself as the truly legitimate government. I suppose the military calls it the shadow government, but it views itself as the actual government. What Thida was saying there about decentralized forms of leadership, what we're seeing in Myanmar at the moment is regards for things like cross-ethnic representation, at the sort of most executive, level of leadership, gender parity, and a greater, I think, awareness of the need to respect and be attentive to diversity in leadership across ethnic lines, across gender lines, for a country that's really conservative in its social fabric and social makeup. These are, I think, quite landmark moments. These are quite, would you say, Thida? These are, because we certainly haven't seen that before. And, you mentioned identity politics. Myanmar is heavily ethnocentric country. We are, there are something like 135 ethnic groups and subgroups that make up our country. So you can imagine the types of sort of, intersecting interests and identities that form that. And of course, people prosecuting their own interests and their own identities. And these are groups with their own languages as well. So in that way, I suppose maybe that's partly the watershed moment you're talking about. That's different from previous moments. We're also speeding through time, Thida. So I just wanted to explain that to the audience so they have a bit of a sense of, I suppose, the things that you're talking about. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to break it out to the audience. So if you have a question for Thida, please have a think about what you'd like to ask her, and I'll open the floor in a sec. But just bringing together some of the strands that you're talking about, Thida, I suppose there are large, I mentioned the entrenched civil conflict that's taking place. So we're faced with large-scale forces and actors, I think, that makes it very hard to shift towards, lasting change. I feel like there are things that have already been set in motion, certainly, with the National Unity Government, the setting up, which has declared an armed struggle, an armed revolution against the Burmese military. I suppose my question is, in such a wide-ranging and long-standing conflict, how do we do activism? Because we gather as a very small community here as part of Perth for people who are interested in what's going over there, and interested in maybe ways that they might be able to help or might be able to contribute. So, and what I'm seeing at the moment, at least in our diaspora community, Perth and in Australia, is certainly activism through political rallies, through lobbying politicians, letter writing campaigns, to both governments and to corporations, all targeted, I suppose, at large scale outcomes. But we've also talked before about activism, perhaps on a smaller scale, when we spoke about last year, Thida. So not just appealing to the broader political framework, but attending to also at the same time, to the importance of the personal, the immediate, the individual. And you told me at that time about this project that Penyama was working on called Creativity During Dark Times. So I wanted just to, just gather your thoughts on that, which is how can communities of friends, supporters, etc., like the ones gathered here tonight, best support and sustain and reach out to Myanmar's writers at risk in the ways that attend to both the collective and the individual?
Very good question, and I think it's very important is to support institutional level and individual level too, because as I mentioned, for the Myanmar, the members of the Myanmar riders and the other non-member riders are losing the space, I might say, the space, and at the same time losing their professional income, and making them ended up in working in very different jobs, something like that. So it's very much good idea to support the writers. Maybe their pieces might not be published right now, but they can have secure environment to write it down, something like that. So in terms of supporting, in assisting them with some kind of the funding, it's also very workable. But at institutional level, we cannot, of course, running according to the current situation. It's not very favorable for running as a Myanmar publicly, but the underground, it's trying to keep doing all these things as much as they could. So the giving them chance to having some sort of maybe the digital platform to keep doing their activities in order to help the writers. That will be another thing. And by doing that, and we also might having, I'm looking for the transitional period after the revolution. We obviously need some sort of the kind of social psychological support and the mechanisms in order to make a smooth change from the intense emotional status to the peaceful, walkable emotional status, because we truly need the rehabilitation, the very heavy rehabilitation. That's why I wrote this, the Museum of the Soul. It's a kind of, we truly need to not dwell in the past, but truly need to recognize what happened in the past in order to heal our wounds. And there will be the chance for the writers to make the society to heal their wounds by the literature, by the arts, and then move to the another steps, move to the taking part in the rehabilitation process, the not just the physical rehabilitation, but also the psychological, mental, and social rehabilitation. For those things, I think it's very important. It's also part of the resistance. The aim of the current military is making the writers and the creative industry very weak and unable to cope with the atrocities, and then pretty much passive in response. So in order to strengthen this society, it's more like the active way of resistance. That's the way we can do something. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Thida. I'm going to stop it there for myself, and I'm going to throw it out to the audience because there might be a few questions there that they might have for you. So if we have a question that you'd like to ask Thida about the writing, her work, about anything that she said about the current situation in Myanmar at the moment. Yeah, please. Yeah.
I'm thinking, you can't see me, but I can see you, so that's enough. So you speak incredibly optimistically about the current situation in Burma, in a sense, because what I hear from you is there is an ongoing revolution, and we can see a post-revolutionary moment where we will be able to support writers in a particular way, the work that we will have to do post-revolution. It is very difficult in the midst of a military crackdown and a civil war to keep up this optimism. I really admire it, but I want to know how you do it.
Well, we believe in our resistance. That's and I think the determination. This time, I might say the society, and I really impressed with the citizens of my country. You know, they already determined. Not they said, without our own consent, nobody can govern us. So this kind of the very positive determination by the citizens, making me very positive and very believe in the current resistance and revolution. And I think throughout the history, this is the first time the understanding and very outspoken debates going on among the different society, even though some are pretty much very harsh, very intense criticism each other, but it's all positive to me because this is how we need to go through. Without having open criticisms, we cannot heal any wounds. So this is very positive to me, and I believe the end of the military dictatorship will be very soon.
Well, we hope so, David.
Yes, again, you won't be able to see me, but I wondered if you could paint a picture for us about the literary and journalistic environment which brings together writers from within Myanmar with the diaspora. What kind of literary and journalistic landscape exists for writers who are still writing, for readers who want to read about their product, want to read their product? Is it happening on the internet? Are there newspapers in Burmese which the community is able to support financially or by simply as readers? And are writers able to get material circulated within the country, internationally?
Yeah, thank you. I can say in terms of the journalistic writings and the distributions of this kind of journals, it's going on through the digital platform, even though they stripped off some licenses for the news agency. They all move out to the outside of the country, and there are so many new digital platforms in terms of the news, because right now people are interested in just having the news. That's why there are so many, and the diaspora Burmese communities are helping for this kind of the existence of this new digital journalistic platform. But sadly enough, for the literature, for the writers, it's very limited till now. That's why I really want to get something more in terms of the literature, not simply the journalistic view, because a lot of writers turn out to be losing the platforms. That's why diaspora also cannot do much right now. To be frank, it's pretty much need not just the funding, but also the time. For the literature, it needs a lot of reflection and time to produce. But for the journalism, it's relatively easy. There will be the news, there will be the journalism platform. It's easy. But for the literature, it needs time and reflection. So that's why it's not very many yet. But hopefully we can have it. But for the proper kind of the distribution, it will be another challenge. Through the digital platform, it can also be targeted by the military, not to reaching out to many. So it has potential, but it also have restrictions, I might say. Yeah.
And perhaps if I could, I think the spirit of your question, David, was the sort of connectivity between perhaps writers on the ground there and the international writing community, including those from the diaspora. Thida, you talked about translation. You talked about you were currently translating your work, and I think that's one of the many challenges as well, isn't it? Is that there are a lot of Burmese writers who are writing, but the ability to be able to translate that content into English for not just international readers, but also people from the diaspora, such as myself. I can speak Burmese, but I can't read it. So that's perhaps an additional challenge, and maybe also where some of that connectivity can happen. Would you say, Thida? The sort of training up of and of translators, people and editors, not just the writers themselves.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, translation, the quality translation is a big challenge for us. So that's another area. For example, like we publish as PEN Myanmar, we publish Spring Diary. It's all about the people, the writers contribute in the Spring Revolution, but we cannot make the translation the whole book. So with the assistance of the PEN America, we translated a couple of pieces, but yeah, there are still so many pieces to be translated. Yeah, with the limited funding, we cannot do much. With the limited resources, I mean the human resources who can handle the good quality translation is also not very many. So yeah, in terms of the translation, that's very important. And then I also prefer to get translated not just simply into English, but also into the other languages will be very helpful. Yeah.
Do we have one more question for Thida? All right. So just feeding off that conversation there, and the question there was from David. I might also give a plug that actually that project of sharing the work of Burmese writers in a space where there's a diminishing space, certainly within Burma, within Myanmar. But we recently, through the Centre for Stories here, but specifically through Portside Review, which is an online journal, we had a project where we commissioned over 30 Burmese writers, one of whom was included Thida. We commissioned fiction, poetry, essays, so on and so forth. But that was a way for both Myanmar diaspora writers, but also in-country writers, some of whom actually wrote under pseudonyms because they were at risk. So so there are, I think, these types of pockets of things that are going on, and that was a really, really terrific project and it also really gave me a sense of really the value of we worked with my colleague, another wonderful Burmese writer, Thet, who is based in the UK. He's a wonderful poet, but also a wonderful translator. So it really goes to show these skills that are needed: editing, writing, translation, to really bring, and also to I suppose nourish what seems to be, sadly, a landscape of Burmese writers who are obviously disillusioned, who are finding it hard to find that spark, in the current climate. So thanks very much for sharing that, Thida. I've just got one closing question to you before we wrap it up for the night. We've talked a lot about a lot of things that makes it very easy for us to feel down, and this is really a subset of Krishna's question. can very easy to feel despair when you are looking at what's going on in Myanmar at the moment. How do you hold on to hope in the current moment?
As I said, the hope is with the people. I do believe in the people compared to the other revolution in the world, you know, for example, like the Belarus revolution and the revolution in Iran and etc. Hong Kong, for example, they all simply pretty much suppressed and vanished by the regimes and the dictators. But in terms of our revolution, it has been almost more than 900 days, almost the 1,000 days. Every single day there is a protest, there is a fighting, you know. So it's a very much like the big message from the people of Myanmar. Without our consent, nobody can govern us. This is the most beautiful hope for me. With that hope, I still existed. I can say, you know, I believe in people.
All right. I think that's a very fitting note to end on, Thida. Thank you very much for your time. Can we give Thida?
Thank you. I'm really grateful.
I'm going
to
you can stay. I was just going to say thank you to you again, Thida, but also say thank you to Chris for making the connection for us with you and for doing this lovely conversation. And at this moment, I don't think you could have ended on a better message than the message of hope and the fact that hope comes from this everyday resistance. Every day somebody is out on the street, and this is not just a message about Burma, it is a message about all of us being in the maze. In your wonderful poem, that's not just a message for Burma. I think that's a message for all of us. Here in Australia, we are facing a big decision. We've got, as you might know, a vote coming up in terms of how we recognize the Indigenous population, and we don't want to be going in circles. And the frustration of going in circles is wonderfully captured in that poem. Cannot be more grateful to you for bringing that message of hope, and we hope to welcome you in Perth very soon. Thank you.
Sure, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your solidarity.
And as Krishna said, we do hope to see you in Perth very soon. We'll you know, continue to chat with you offline from that. But yeah, all the best. Thanks very much for joining us from Germany, and also a shout out to our online audience as well. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks, Thida. We'll chat soon. Yeah.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.